Putting people into space is fairly routine these days. Living cheek by jowl in cramped accommodation for months on end, what could possibly go wrong? Welcome to the third instalment of the Broken Bones podcast. Float on as you listen to the Capsule.
It was the day before Thanksgiving aboard the space station. Processing around the globe for nearly 20 years, it was now reaching the end of its working life. Only 2 people remained on board, Kwasi Stevenson and Marissa Ruby. They had been tasked with the job of decommissioning the aging vessel and preparing it for a controlled re-entry through the Earth's atmosphere, where it would burn up. The remaining parts falling harmlessly into the Pacific Ocean. Marissa and Kwasi were tasked with working their way through an extremely long checklist of items to be saved from obliteration. Over the years, there had been a lot of scientific experiments conducted aboard the space station, some of which were top secret, and these had to be carefully accounted for. The agency didn't want there to be even a remote chance that these might survive re-entry and be recovered by hostile actors. So it was that the last 2 astronauts aboard carefully catalogued and stowed any remnants of the experiments on their list, ready for the return to Earth. "Right, let's get to it," said Kwasi. "We won't be home in time for Easter at this rate." He picked up the checklist. It was all going to plan, and they only had one thing left to look at before they could pack up their belongings and ready themselves for the return journey. "Marissa, can you show where 17.426 is supposed to be? I can't see it." Marissa took the instructions for retrieving the experiment out of a plastic ring binder and held it up to the light. Squinting slightly, she slowly reads aloud. "Experiment 17.426. The effects of microgravity on bacterial microbes over an extended period of time." Wow, this is an old one. It's been running almost from the start. "These are some very special microbes," Kwasi jokes. "They certainly are, or rather were. I can't see any sign of them. What exactly am I looking for?" "Well, it says here that there should be a small incubator with a few sealed flasks inside. Apparently, the bacteria are anaerobic and self-sustaining." Marissa peers into a small enclave containing several incubators. "Hang on, there's only one incubator switched on. It's right at the back." Marissa stretches to reach it. The lack of gravity was making reaching for things very difficult. Marissa stretches toward the catch and pings it open, recoiling slightly as she does. A small light pops on inside the box. 3 flasks. Should be right in front of you, Kwasi says as he peruses the notes. Nope, nothing here. Are you sure this is it?" "Wait, there's a label on the inside of the door. 17.426. They should be in there." "That's as maybe. But if you can see it, you're doing better than me." Both the crew investigate the inside of the fridge. It's clearly empty. "I think we'd better call this in." Marissa pushes away from the corner and floats over to the comms panel and grabs a headset, depressing a button on the console. She calls out, "Hey, Mission Control. We've got a bit of a problem here. We're missing a sample." There is a momentary pause before Capcom crackles back down the radio. Which is the sample you're missing? The last one, 17.426. There's a further pause. Hang on, please. That's a bit odd, Marissa mumbles. Kwasi replies, It is, isn't it? Usually, they're straight back at you if there's a problem. It was at this point that there was a very loud, piercing whistle that came over the radio, which caused Marissa to rip the headset from her ears. Jesus, what was that? It almost burst my bloody eardrum. You okay? Kwasi pushes himself toward her and gingerly picks up the headset and holds it a few centimeters from his ear. Come in, Mission Control. Do you copy? All he can hear is the empty hiss of static. It's dead. It can't be. Try the backup. He switches to the auxiliary radio, holding the headset slightly away from his ear, just in case. He tries again. Come in, Mission Control. More static. It's dead too. How can this be possible? We can't be up here with no radio. What about the radio in the shuttle? Says Kwasi. Good thinking, Marissa says, as she pushes off from the desk and heads toward the capsule. Undoing the airlock, she glides into the vessel and straps herself into the pilot seat. Flicking a few switches, she turns on the power, lighting up the control panel in front of her. She takes the headset from its stowage and carefully holds it a few centimeters from her ear. Capcom, do you read me? Come in, Mission Control. She releases the talk button and waits for a reply. Kwasi drops in behind her. Well? She slowly lowers the headset. Nothing, not even static, just dead air. Did you have to put it like that? Sorry. What are we going to do? Do you know, I really don't know. We never simulated 3 radios going down at the same time. Why would we? Well, regardless of that, they have. How are we going to get home? They both stare at each other in silence. From the main module, there comes a loud crash. What the hell was that? Kwasi is the first to move. He pushes off hard and heads back into the capsule. He is greeted by the sight of the radio tumbling and bashing off the walls of the craft. It has been ripped from the console. Wires dangle freely in space. Marissa is right behind him. They both stare in horror at the sight before them. Is it fixable? Does it look fixable? It's knackered. More to the point, how did it end up here? Marissa catches hold of the wrecked radio, and they both stare at it. After a pause, Marissa turns to Kwasi. You were in here on your own. Did you do it? Of course I didn't bloody do it. Why would I? Do you think I really want to die up here? We both heard the bang, didn't we? Marissa thinks for a moment. Even though the incident only happened a few seconds ago, she's struggling to remember. Yes, I suppose so. Marissa, what do you mean, I suppose so? Marissa, look at me. We were there together when we heard the bang. We were in the capsule together, remember? Marissa? Marissa shakes her head and tries to remember. Come on, Marissa. I need you to be 100% in the room. We're in a lot of trouble, and I can't do this on my own. It's okay. I'm okay. She regained her composure and took a deep breath. I'm fine. Kwasi floated up to the control panel and took down 2 large ring binders. These were the procedures for returning the capsule to Earth. "What are you doing, Kwasi?" "I'm making a decision. We're going to have to leave the ship. We've got no radio, and I'm concerned about you. If we leave it much longer, I don't know what's going to happen. But I'm the ranking officer here. We've got a mission to complete. You can't just..." Her voice drifts off, and a far-off look comes over her. Marissa, snap out of it. For Christ's sake, Marissa." Marissa's body grows limp. Her arms drift in front of her, shoulders rising above her drooping head. She rests, as if drowned in midair. Kwasi pushes himself over to her. Holding her head, he lifts it and looks in her eyes. They are open, and she is breathing, but she looks out of it. Kwasi does a slow orbit of his comatose colleague. Grabbing the scruff of her neck, he pushes off and drags her to the tool locker. Opening it with his free hand, he rummages around inside until he finds the duct tape. Biting the end, he pulls a long strip out and begins to wind it around Marissa's unconscious body. He loops the tape around a strut several times, tethering her to the ship. Kwasi finds the manuals and takes them to the capsule. Entering the module for the last time, he opens a locker and removes 2 spacesuits. At this point, Marissa begins to stir. "Kwasi, what's going on?" She slowly starts to come to, discovering her bindings. She struggles to move. "What's going on? Kwasi! Kwasi! Kwasi, untie me!" "Don't be silly, Marissa." He chuckled. "Why would I do that?" "Kwasi, have you lost your mind?" "Oh, yes, Marissa. I have, quite completely." "What?" She shook her head again and struggled to free herself, but the tape held its grip. "The experiment 17.426. You know what? It worked." He looks at her as she struggles against her bonds. He continues. "The purpose of 17.426 was to see what effect long-term microgravity had on bacteria. Well, the effect was that over time, they mutated. These weren't any ordinary bacteria to start with. They were a culture that had been engineered by the military. They have this really weird property, whereby contact with them would cause a sudden personality change in the exposed subject. They would become very aggressive and almost uncontrollable with rage. The experiment was to see if they could be engineered to keep the aggression, but make the host more receptive to commands. And it worked, sort of. But why does that involve smashing the radio and tying me up? Couldn't we have just taken it back together? That was the plan. But unfortunately, I've been got at by the other side. I've been an agent for them for years. Getting picked for this mission was what I had been tasked with. I knew I couldn't get the flask past you. So you know what I did? I infected myself with a sample. I ditched the rest out the airlock, into space. I've got an endless supply of the bacterium sloshing around in my veins now. Aside from making me quite angry, 14.426 has also given me a very strong desire to survive. Overwhelmingly, so in fact. And now you know about me, you must die. Sorry, old love. That's just how it is. So now, I'm going to fake an accident where you die, and I return to Earth alone as the sole survivor. Obviously, I'll be the hero. You bloody lunatic. Let me go. Goodbye, Marissa. I do hope you'll burn up completely. I wouldn't want any evidence to be left." And with that, he reached into the toolbox and removes a knife. He takes Marissa's spacesuit, holds it up, and slashes a large hole in it. He grins broadly at her. Abandoning the knife, he enters the capsule and winds the airlock shut. Through the cupola, she could see the external lights of the capsule flicker on as Kwasi went through the steps to ready the capsule for re-entry. This wasn't quite how she'd imagined her final minutes. Trussed up, alone, and helpless in space. She glances around for anything that might help her free herself of the tape. At that moment, she notices the knife Kwasi had so carelessly discarded, slowly pirouetting towards her. As it gets closer, she manages to wriggle a few fingers free on her bonds and stretches her fingertips toward the blade of the knife as it slowly processes past her. Just as it arrives at her hand, she catches the very end of the blade. She lets out a breath. "Don't drop it," she says to herself, as she instantly fumbles it. "Shit it," she hisses. Dropping the knife has changed its trajectory, and with the first bit of luck she'd had that day, it spins towards her head. Very carefully, she catches the handle in her mouth. She takes a breath. Using her tongue and teeth, she adjusts her grip on the knife and sets about sawing at the tape around her neck. After a minute, despite stabbing herself a few times, she manages to work her shoulders free. Kwasi is getting near to the end of the checklist, and he will soon be leaving. Marissa gets one arm almost out of her bindings. With a final heave, her arm is free. She grabs the knife from her mouth and quickly frees the rest of her body from the remaining tape. Flying to the cupola, she can see Kwasi is on the last few steps of the re-entry procedure. She must act fast. But what can she do? She knows she is doomed. Even if she can get him out of the capsule, she doesn't have a suit for re-entry. He's destroyed hers, and his won't fit her. Without it, she will almost certainly suffocate on the way back down. No, there's nothing left to do except for something desperate, and she needs to do it fast. It was at that moment that Kwasi releases the capsule from the mothership. It silently parts company and starts to turn toward the Earth. She can see the thrusters blinking in the darkness as the capsule begins to recede into the distance. She looks at the control panel. What was she going to do? She scans it again. "Wait," she says to herself. "There are thrusters on this ship too." There is no time for procedure. All she can do is to have one burn of the engines, one chance. Marissa has always been an outstandingly intuitive pilot. She had been top of any class she had been in, and now was the time for her to show what she was really made of. Tracking Kwasi's capsule on the radar to her left, she quickly calculates and punches his trajectory into the main guidance computer and sets the space station on a collision course with the capsule. Locking in the coordinates, she was just about to hit the button for a full and final burn when she hesitates. What if I miss? She adjusts the fuel, so she saves a tiny amount just in case. With that, she smashes her hands down on the fire button, and the huge spaceship vibrates and heaves as it begins to move. There is enough fuel for a 30-second burn at full thrust. The space station picks up speed as the monstrous vehicle lumbers into action. The angle she's been forced to set means that if she misses Kwasi, she will bounce off the Earth's atmosphere and head off into deep space, never to be seen again. She hangs onto the control panel as the giant engines push the station toward the capsule. Her head drops slightly as she considers her fate. But the risk of letting him get back down to the ground with the mutated bacteria inside him was not something she could allow. She notices that she has been running a temperature for quite some time. Her teeth were clamped together, and she wasn't feeling herself. Then it dawned on her, the strange feeling she'd experienced, the passing out. She must have been infected too. She redoubles her determination to stop Kwasi at any cost. The space station has now picked up considerable speed and is bearing down on Kwasi's ship. Through the cupola, she can see the capsule grow, and in the window of the escape pod, Kwasi's face as they speed toward each other. She can see him frantically calculating adjustments to his path to avoid being rammed. Marissa has already taken this into account. From where they are, she calculates there is only one escape trajectory that doesn't involve Kwasi's destruction by the huge satellite. But would he try to take it? Kwasi was an adequate pilot at best, and Marissa reasons he will find it and try to take it. But it will take split-second timing, and she still has one last trick up her sleeve. She can see the thrusters on the capsule ignite for a final desperate burn as Kwasi attempts to escape. "Got you," says Marissa as she fires the rockets. They splutter back into life. There's just enough fuel to change course, and the space station turns just enough to clip the capsule, nudging Kwasi's ship, flipping it so the heat shield is no longer protecting it from the destructive heat of re-entry. Through the glass, Marissa can see Kwasi, pressed against the window, his fists hammering on the glass, his face contorted in rage as the capsule glows red, then white hot as he winks out of existence. Meanwhile, the lumbering space station gently bounces off the Earth's atmosphere as it slowly spins into the vast emptiness of space. At that point, the backup radio spits back into life. "Space station, do you copy? Come in, do you copy?" But Marissa doesn't copy. She simply stares from the cupola back at the fast receding Earth, whilst a quiet bacterial rage boils away inside her. The Capsule was written by Tony Hazel and read by Nicole the AI Psychopath. This recording is copyright 2 Kittens Publishing 2024.